because the most important Hungarian historical characters are being commemorated and presented on these two colonnades, starting from the state founder king all the way up to the times when the whole thing was more or less built. Actually, it's just like a big book. It's open like two big pages. But in the middle, you also see these people on the horseback. Let me give you a few words about the land itself. The land of Hungary is a very precious soil, very fertile. Agriculturally, therefore, it was always very busy here, and there was time whatever 3,000 years ago, civilizations came and left. Illyrians, Celtic people, and Slavic tribes were settled in this area that is called the Carpathian Basin. The Carpathians are these big mountains that are surrounding this territory. We have fertile soils, we have abundant rivers, and literary gold mines everywhere. So that's why civilization was very attractive to this land, long time ago already. For instance, 2,000 years ago, on the land of Hungary, there were no Hungarians yet, they say, but it was part of the Roman Empire. It was a province. Therefore, it wasn't even called Hungary, it was called Pannonia. Pannonia doesn't exist anymore. Actually, it is only a cheese brand today. Very nice cheese. But also because the Roman Empire, if you really think about it, big empires get very big when they are on the top of their sizes. It was around the year 500 after Christ when the Roman Empire started falling apart, and after Christ 500 years was also the time more or less when this very, very strange tribe was coming from Asia for the far steppes of Siberia. You probably all know the name of my son, my father-in-law. That was somebody, the Hun.
Oh, Attila.
Yes. So they came, they had a very distinct fight technique, a very distinct way of treating arrows and horses, fantastic skills. They didn't even use saddles, they were like one person with the horse. And in spite of the fact that the world and Hollywood is trying to paint the whole picture as they were total barbarians, for us they was a very high civilization. They had writings, they wrote in hieroglyphs, and they were controlling a gigantic nation, a big society of tribes and clans for hundreds of years, like the big steps of Asia. So Attila was like a pre-tribe, and he thought, well, it's nice, and it's very difficult to sort out everybody, so he sent messages back. But then again, back in those years, it was like a ticket way to Siberia, and a long time before these 7 tribes, you see those people on the horseback, they're the 7 leaders of the 7 big tribes. And they all spoke one language, but they call that language Magyar. So inside the country, we say this is Magyar land, but outside we are still called Hungarians. But don't worry, we behave these days. There's no more trouble with us anymore. Anyway, those people, those tribes had a shamanic religion. And we are in Europe where Christianity was institutionalized by them. So the smart leaders of the Magyars understood that religion is a thing that you have to agree on a continent. It's very important. But then again, to convert a nation into another religion is not like, would you please be this and that tomorrow or something? Because they were jumping around the fire and they were beating the drum, and they didn't want crosses or anything. They had a very good time. Anyway, so it was battles and fights 4 years again before the Hungarian Christian state was formed. So that's why the cross is important, because you see the 2 lines. One line means the power of politics, and the other line means the religious power united in the king's hand. And that was Stephen, the state founder, is the first one. Of course, he became a saint because he voted out Christianity in Hungary in the year 1000. So since then, the state is founded. Actually, it was very important that it mattered into each other, because in practice it meant that on one side of his throne he had the bishop from Rome, and on the other side he had the shaman, to make sure that everybody is happy. So it meant that he brought in strict laws, he collected tax, he ordered villages to build churches, and he ordered people to having to go to church every Sunday, local news or something, I don't know, but it's like very important in the year 1000. The first kings on the first colony, we see a few saints and very dignified people. The first kings of Hungary were pure Hungarian blood, and they thought they want to invade big territories in Europe towards the west. But back in the middle of the 12th century, instead of these arrogant dreams, they realized that, instead of having dreams of invading more to the west, we should rather defend ourselves and the rest of Western Europe from east. Where is it? Tartar invasion, Genghis Khan's great grandsons came, the Mongols, and they destroyed everything in no time at all. Our real Mongol brothers, years later. Anyway, then Hungary understood that we are the fortress wall of Western Europe. We are like in between East and West, and that is the case. Nothing has changed in this sense, believe me. When the Tartars gone, the Hungarian kings decided to participate in the best business of the world, that was marriage. Hungarian kings started marrying just like any other royal courts. The royalty of Europe is a family. If you look at the family tree, you can see that everybody is everybody at the end of the day. Therefore, sizes of countries and empires were kind of accordingly the family matters. Really, of course, I'm talking very vaguely, but it means a lot anyway. But then in the 1500s come another very big attack from this, the Ottoman Empire. Great Suleiman, the Turks. The Turkish Empire stayed on the land of Hungary less than in the Balkans, because it was only 150 years only. Imagine, so I could say welcome to Turkey. I mean, like 500 years, this is Turkey. It's very interesting. 150 years is a very long time. But at the end, Hungarians did win the final battle. And to express to you the importance historically of this country is like, if in that final battle Hungarians would not have won, then ladies today we would all stand here like this. It's very important. Little country, long time ago, this and that, but it's very important in the world history, because it was Islam that went into almost to invade the entire Europe, but they were not here. Austria was worried, they are our western neighbors, so they came to help, but in the meanwhile, they also thought that the Turks are gone, so we should just keep the western part of Hungary. Hungarians didn't think so, so then they started wars against each other, Austria and Hungary, and after decades they understood that instead of wars we should sit down and sign this famous compromise, because there was no war. The compromise says that the Emperor of Austria is the king of Hungary. And in fact they did have Hungarian blood because of the marriage before. I must say that the last official inheritor of the Hungarian crown died last week. There is no more official inheritor of the crown. His name was Dr. Otto Habsburg, an aged gentleman, last week. However, it's not a kingdom there anymore, so it's like this. So then we have this big monarchy, the big empire, and the whole thing that you have seen today so far has been the time of the monarchy, considering particularly this big celebration. The millennium was such a big thing, like the Olympics somewhere these days, that they build everything and they bring new cities alive and such. So that's what we have so far seen. Francis Joseph the Emperor was the great opener of the Budapest Millennium celebration. The two museums as well, the beautiful avenues, the city park, everything was built there. On the land of Hungary there were circular and radial railroads. Must have been very upsetting for other powerful countries, I believe. So remember that the monarchy was the reason of World War I, because the cousin of Francis Joseph was shot in Sarajevo, and then broke out the first most terrible war of the world. from 1914 until 1919. Hungary comes out as a loser from World War I because in France, in the Versailles Treaty, they punished Hungary because of the monarchy, because of the railroads really. They wanted to make sure that the railroads are cut in parts. So 2/3 of Hungary's original territory is lost. That's a big much, especially if you think of families like, can you see your family that you can never go to another state because it belongs to another country and you have your somebody important there. That's what happened. So Hungary enters the Second World War on the German side. Let me tell you why. We entered officially as a food supplier of the German army, and we entered on the German side because it was England and France that took away the And the other problem was that we could have been allied with another very strong power, but the problem was that we didn't want to. Our eastern neighbors, by then, they were called the Soviet Union. That we didn't want that. So comes Germany. In spite of the promises, Hungarian men are all lost at the very beginning of World War II, including my poor grandfather. I never saw him, that was a long time ago. Because not even my mother saw him. So he was lost, and Hungarian ministry wants to detach from the madness of Nazi Germany. There are very serious declarations, and in the madness and agony of Hitler, he introduces Holocaust and revenges this country, making Hungary an international war scene. So we are an international war scene at the very end of World War II, and unfortunately it is perfectly true that the Soviet army has liberated us. The Soviet army liberated us in 1945. The problem only was that they forgot to go home. Really. So perhaps you have heard of a very important date, 1956. 1956 October in Hungary is very important because worldwide also it's important. That was the first revolution ever against communism. That was the first wound on communism all over the planet, I must say. And the Western world was completely with us, with the thoughts, with every step they made, the people. The problem was that perhaps you know about the Yalta contract. Stalin, Churchill and Roosevelt decided with the cigar and cigarette and pipe the business long before. It didn't matter what people want, you know, when you are pointed at by the Soviet hands, and very simple, ordinary people like us filled up this square in 56 October. It was citizens, you know, intellects and workers and grandmothers and children and dogs came here and it was broadcasted all over the Western world, but then came the tanks of the Soviet Union. If you are targeted by a tank, then you probably will stop having opinions, go home or leave the country or something. Maybe you have acquaintance who just left because it was just fear ruling. So, but then again, I must tell you that the communism in Hungary was the so-called goulash communism. Because in the communist bloc, we were the most Western, you know. So it was a lot of things were possible. It was a special, it's not like in East Germany, Romania, Soviet Union, Poland. We had a much looser communism. Anyway, communism faded out. The perestroika and Gorbachev had to be nice because they had no money. They spent the money on the spaceships, you know. And Reagan was very dedicated to people fighting with him because they ran out of money. So communism bankrupted completely by 1989, and a lot of very important things happened, like Berlin Wall, Ceausescu was killed, but practically there was no money behind the communism. So that we are very happy, finally the last Russian soldier leaves,